The gunshot that split the peaceful morning air of Willow Creek was not the first to disturb its quiet streets, but it was the first to make Samantha Lawson smile. The bullet had found its home in the wooden post, just above the heads of 3 drunken ranch hands who had been pestering her for a dance, or worse, outside her father's general store. The year was 1885, and in the Arizona Territory, a woman who could shoot straight earned a certain kind of respect, even if it came with whispers. "Next time," Samantha called out, her voice carrying across the dusty Main Street, "I won't be aiming for the wood." She lowered her father's Colt revolver, blowing at the wisp of smoke that curled from its barrel. The men scattered like quail, stumbling over themselves and each other as they retreated toward the saloon. Their curses faded as they disappeared behind the swinging doors, leaving Samantha alone on the boardwalk, her heart hammering against her ribs despite her outward calm. At 22, Samantha had already turned down more marriage proposals than most women in the territory would receive in a lifetime. It wasn't that she was particularly beautiful, though her chestnut hair and deep blue eyes had drawn their share of admiring glances, but rather that she was the only daughter of the most prosperous merchant in Willow Creek. That, and the fact that her father was getting on in years with no sons to inherit his business, made her the most eligible spinster for 100 miles. "You cannot keep shooting at every man who offers for your hand, my dear," her father, William Lawson, said as he appeared in the doorway behind her, his face a mixture of amusement and concern. "Sooner or later, you might hit one." Samantha tucked the pistol into the pocket of her apron. "They weren't offering marriage, Pa, at least not the kind that comes with a preacher." Her father sighed, reaching up to stroke his graying beard. "Even so, a woman needs a husband out here." "When I'm gone, I'll run the store myself," she interrupted, the familiar argument settling between them like an old, comfortable quilt. "I've been keeping your books since I was 14. I can order stock, manage inventory, and haggle with customers better than any man in the territory." "It isn't proper," he protested weakly. "Proper," Samantha laughed, a sound that carried down the street and caused several passers-by to turn their heads. "Is it proper for a woman to live alone out here, to face outlaws and angry Apaches without a man's protection? If I must choose between proper and alive, I'll choose alive every time." William Lawson merely shook his head, knowing from long experience that there was no winning an argument with his daughter. Her mother had been just as stubborn, God rest her soul. "Come inside, then. The new shipment from back east has arrived, and there's inventory to be done." Inside the cool dimness of the general store, Samantha breathed in the familiar scents of leather, coffee beans, and the faint hint of the lavender sachets she placed among the fabric bolts to keep away moths. This was her world, practical, orderly, and under her control. Unlike the chaos of emotion that came with the marriage proposals and flirtations she so firmly rejected, by evening, news of Samantha's latest stand against unwanted suitors had spread throughout Willow Creek. As she and her father made their way to the weekly town social at the church hall, whispers followed them like shadows. "That Lawson girl. Never marry. Stubborn as a mule. Shame with her father's business." The social was like all the others before it, the same faces, the same music from Mr. Peterson's fiddle, the same punch that someone always managed to spike when Reverend Clark wasn't looking. Samantha stood near the refreshment table, watching the dancers swirl across the wooden floor, content in her solitude. "Miss Lawson." Sheriff Thomas appeared at her side, his weathered face creased in a smile beneath his salt and pepper mustache. "I understand there was some trouble at your father's store today," Samantha smiled thinly. "Nothing I couldn't handle, Sheriff, so I heard," he chuckled. "Those Harris boys won't be forgetting that lesson anytime soon. Still, a woman shouldn't have to defend herself that way." "Have you given any thought to, if you're about to suggest I find myself a husband, Sheriff?" she interrupted. "You can save your breath. I've heard it all before." The sheriff raised his hands in surrender. "Can't blame a man for trying. Your father is worried about you, that's all." "My father worries too much." Samantha's gaze drifted to where William Lawson sat with the other town elders, deep in conversation. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. No one doubts that, Miss Lawson, but life out here isn't meant to be faced alone. Before she could respond, Mrs. Whitaker, the mayor's wife and the town's most notorious gossip, swooped down upon them, her considerable girth barely contained by her Sunday best. Samantha Lawson, is it true you nearly shot the Harris brothers this morning? She demanded, loud enough for several nearby conversations to halt abruptly. Samantha met the older woman's gaze evenly. I fired a warning shot, Mrs. Whitaker. There's a difference. HMPH, a lady should not be handling firearms at all, let alone threatening respectable men with them. Respectable? Samantha couldn't help but laugh. Those respectable men were suggesting things that would make even your husband blush, Mrs. Whitaker. The older woman's face flushed crimson. Well, I never. This is precisely why a young woman needs a husband to protect her virtue and keep her from such scandalous behavior. I protect my own virtue quite effectively, thank you, Samantha replied coolly. Mrs. Whitaker drew herself up to her full height, which still left her a good 6 inches shorter than Samantha. You cannot go on like this forever, my dear. A woman alone is an invitation to tragedy in these parts. Besides, who will care for you when your father passes? Who will run the store? I will, Samantha said firmly. A titter of laughter rippled through the growing audience. Mrs. Whitaker's expression was a mixture of pity and condescension. A woman running a business, alone, my dear, be reasonable. Samantha felt her temper rising, the familiar heat crawling up her neck and into her cheeks. I am being reasonable. I'm the one who's kept my father's books for years. I'm the one who handles the ordering and inventory. I know that business better than anyone. But it simply isn't done, Mrs. Whitaker insisted. A woman needs a husband. Well, I don't, Samantha declared, her voice rising enough to silence the remaining conversations in the hall. Even Mr. Peterson's fiddle squeaked to a halt. I don't need a husband, and I won't be taking one. Not now, not ever. The silence that followed her pronouncement lasted only a moment before it was broken by laughter, first a chuckle from old Mr. Fleming, then a giggle from one of the younger girls, and soon a wave of amused disbelief swept through the gathering. She says she'll marry no one, Mrs. Whitaker announced, as if translating a foreign language. Did you hear that? Samantha Lawson says she'll marry no one. The laughter grew louder, echoing off the wooden walls of the church hall. Samantha stood rigid, her face burning with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. This was exactly why she preferred the solitude of the store to these social gatherings, the judgment, the expectations, the narrow-minded insistence that a woman was nothing without a man. What's all this about? The deep voice cut through the laughter like a knife. The crowd parted, revealing a tall figure silhouetted in the doorway of the church hall. As he stepped into the light, Samantha saw a man she didn't recognize, a stranger in a town where strangers were rare. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in the practical garb of a working cowboy, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a vest that had seen better days. His hat was pushed back on his head, revealing a face tanned by the sun and weathered by the elements. Dark hair curled at the nape of his neck, and his eyes, a startling shade of green, surveyed the scene with curious intensity. They're laughing because Miss Lawson here says she'll never marry, Sheriff Thomas explained, amusement still evident in his voice. The stranger's gaze settled on Samantha, taking in her flushed face and defiant stance. For a long moment he said nothing, simply studying her as if she were a puzzle to be solved. Then, to her surprise, he smiled, not the mocking grin she expected, but something softer, almost understanding. Is that so? He said, his voice carrying easily across the now silent room. He stepped forward, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. Well then, I reckon I'll just wait right here. The simple statement, delivered without a hint of mockery, silenced the room completely. Samantha stared at him, unsure whether he was making fun of her or not. But there was no laughter in those green eyes, only a quiet challenge that made her heart beat a little faster. Wait for what, exactly? She asked, finding her voice at last. His smile widened, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. For you to change your mind, Miss Lawson. Fresh laughter erupted, but this time it was directed at the stranger rather than at Samantha. He didn't seem to mind, his gaze never leaving her face. "And who exactly are you?" she demanded, ignoring the fluttering sensation in her stomach. "Heath Larson, madam." He inclined his head slightly. "New foreman at the Circle S ranch." A murmur ran through the crowd. The Circle S was the largest ranch in the territory, owned by Jacob Sinclair, one of the wealthiest men in Arizona. The previous foreman had been killed in a stampede just last month, a tragedy that had been the talk of Willow Creek for weeks. "Well, Mr. Larson," Samantha said, drawing herself up to her full height, "you'll be waiting a very long time." He settled his hat back on his head, that small smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'm a patient man, Miss Lawson." With that, he tipped his hat to her and moved away, greeting Sheriff Thomas with a handshake before making his way to the refreshment table. The music started up again, conversations resumed, and the moment passed, but Samantha found her gaze repeatedly drawn to the tall cowboy throughout the evening. She told herself it was merely curiosity about a newcomer, nothing more. But when their eyes met across the room for the third time, and that same small smile appeared on his face, she couldn't ignore the strange, unfamiliar warmth that spread through her chest. It was nothing, she assured herself. Just the heat of the crowded hall and the lingering embarrassment from her public declaration. It certainly wasn't interest in Heath Larson or his ridiculous claim that he would wait for her to change her mind, because Samantha Lawson had meant what she said. She would never marry, not for convenience, not for propriety, and certainly not for love. Love, after all, was the most dangerous proposition of all. The following week brought a routine that was anything but. Heath Larson, it seemed, had been entirely serious about his declaration. Each morning, as Samantha opened her father's store, she would find him sitting on the bench outside, whittling or reading a newspaper, a cup of coffee balanced on his knee. "Good morning, Miss Lawson," he would say, tipping his hat to her. "Mr. Larson," she would reply with a curt nod before disappearing inside, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at the sight of him. He never followed her in, never made any attempt to speak to her beyond that simple greeting. But his presence was a constant reminder of that night at the social, and of the challenge that hung between them. On the third day, her curiosity got the better of her. "Don't you have work to do at the Circle S?" she asked as she swept the boardwalk in front of the store, pretending not to notice how his presence had drawn the attention of several passers-by. Heath looked up from the piece of wood he was shaping with his pocketknife. "I do. I ride out there after breakfast." "And yet you're here wasting time." "Not wasting," he corrected mildly. "Investing." Samantha snorted, an unladylike sound that would have horrified Mrs. Whittaker. "In what? A lost cause?" He smiled, that infuriating smile, the one that made the dimple appear in his cheek. "Nothing worth having comes easy, Miss Lawson." "I am not something to be had, Mr. Larson," she snapped. "No, madam, you certainly are not." He pocketed his knife and stood, brushing wood shavings from his pants. "You're a woman who knows her own mind, and I respect that. I'm not trying to have you just hoping for the chance to know you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Most men who pursued her wanted something: her father's business, her modest dowry, or simply the conquest of the woman who refused all comers. But there was something different about Heath Larson, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. "Why what? Why do you want to know me? There are plenty of eligible young women in Willow Creek who aren't as—" She hesitated, searching for the right word. "Stubborn," he suggested, his eyes twinkling. "Independent, capable of shooting a man's hat off at 50 paces. Despite herself, Samantha felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I was going to say difficult, but those work too." Heath laughed, a rich, warm sound that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "I've never much cared for things that come easy, Miss Lawson, and I've found that the most interesting people are often the ones others find difficult." He reached down and picked up a small wooden figure from the bench, a bird with wings outstretched in flight. "For you," he said, holding it out to her. "A reminder that freedom and companionship don't have to be mutually exclusive." Samantha hesitated, then reached out to take the carving. It was beautifully done, the details of the feathers and the curve of the wings rendered with surprising skill. You made this. Keeps my hands busy. He shrugged, suddenly seeming almost shy. My pa taught me, said a man should be able to create something beautiful, not just destroy. It's lovely, she admitted, running her finger over the smooth wood. Thank you. He nodded, settling his hat more firmly on his head. I should be getting out to the ranch. Mr. Sinclair doesn't pay me to sit in town all morning, pleasant as the company might be. As he walked away, Samantha found herself watching him go, the wooden bird clutched in her hand. It was only when Mrs. Peterson called out a greeting from across the street, her knowing smile all too apparent, that Samantha realized she'd been standing there far longer than she intended. Flustered, she hurried back into the store, setting the carving on the counter perhaps more forcefully than necessary. A gift from your cowboy, her father asked, looking up from the ledger he was reviewing. He is not my cowboy, Samantha insisted. He's just persistent. William Lawson picked up the wooden bird, examining it with appreciation. Skilled hands made this, patient ones too. He glanced at his daughter, his eyes twinkling. Patience is a fine quality in a man, don't you think? Pa, Samantha warned. He held up his hands in surrender. I'm just making conversation, my dear. No need to reach for that pistol of yours. Despite her annoyance, Samantha felt a reluctant smile tugging at her lips. I wouldn't shoot you, Pa. Who would do the heavy lifting around here? Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of their first customer of the day, Jacob Sinclair himself, the owner of the Circle S Ranch and Heath Larson's employer. A large man with a booming voice and a reputation for driving hard bargains, Sinclair was nonetheless respected throughout the territory for his fair dealings and generous support of the town. William, and the lovely Miss Lawson, he greeted them, removing his expensive hat. Fine morning, isn't it? Indeed it is, Jacob, William replied, coming around the counter to shake the rancher's hand. What brings you to town so early? Need to stock up for the spring roundup. Got 20 new hands coming in and they eat like locusts. His gaze fell on the wooden bird and his bushy eyebrows rose. Now that's a fine piece of work. Larson's, isn't it? Recognized the style. Samantha felt her cheeks warm. You know his work. Been watching him whittle in the bunkhouse every evening, Sinclair confirmed. Man's got talent, no doubt about it. Got talent for a lot of things, actually. Best horse trainer I've ever seen, and I've been ranching for 30 years. He seems capable, Samantha allowed, trying to sound indifferent. Sinclair laughed, a booming sound that filled the store. Capable. That's like calling a mountain somewhat tall, Miss Lawson. When I hired him away from that spread in Texas, they offered to double his pay to keep him, but he had his heart set on Arizona. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Between you and me, I think he was running from something or someone. Man doesn't move halfway across the country without a reason. The thought had never occurred to Samantha. What might Heath Larson be running from? A jilted lover? The law, her curiosity, already piqued by the cowboy's unexpected persistence, deepened further. Now then, Sinclair continued, oblivious to her thoughts, let's talk supplies. I'll need flour, coffee, beans, the usual. And William, I hope you've got some of that Kentucky bourbon put aside for me. My investors are coming out next month and I need to impress them. As her father and Sinclair haggled good-naturedly over prices, Samantha found herself running her fingers over the wooden bird again, wondering about the man who had carved it and what secrets he might be hiding behind those green eyes and that patient smile. Heath Larson had indeed come to Arizona running from something, but it wasn't the law or a broken heart, as the gossips of Willow Creek might have speculated. It was memory, the kind that haunted a man's dreams and shadowed his waking hours. As he rode back to the Circle S after his morning vigil outside the Lawson store, he thought about the woman who had captured his attention from the moment he'd walked into that church social. Samantha Lawson was unlike any woman he'd ever met, fierce, independent, and unafraid to stand her ground against a town full of people telling her how she ought to live her life. She reminded him a little of his sister, Emma, who had possessed that same fire, that same determination to chart her own course. But Emma had never had the chance to fully spread her wings. The epidemic that had swept through their Texas town 3 years ago had taken her, along with Heath's parents and younger brother, in the space of a single terrible week. He'd stayed on at the family ranch for a time, trying to keep it going, but the memories were too painful. Every corner of the house, every stretch of pasture held echoes of the family he'd lost. When Jacob Sinclair had passed through looking for an experienced foreman, Heath had sold the ranch, packed his few possessions, and headed west, hoping distance might dull the ache of grief. It hadn't, not entirely. But for the first time since burying his family, he'd felt a spark of interest in something beyond mere survival. And that spark had a name: Samantha Lawson. Heath wasn't sure exactly what had prompted him to make that bold declaration at the social. It certainly hadn't been planned, but something about the way she'd stood there, defiant in the face of mockery, had awakened something in him: admiration, certainly, but also a recognition of kindred spirit. They were both outsiders in their own way, both determined to live life on their own terms. His musing was interrupted as he crested the hill overlooking the Circle S ranch. It was an impressive spread 10,000 acres of prime grazing land, a large main house where Sinclair lived with his wife and 2 grown sons, a bunkhouse for the hands, stables, and various outbuildings. In the distance, a herd of cattle grazed peacefully, tended by a couple of cowboys on horseback. Sinclair was a fair boss who paid well and treated his men with respect, but he expected results. As foreman, Heath was responsible for ensuring that every aspect of the ranch's operations ran smoothly, from the care of the livestock to the management of the hands. It was demanding work, but Heath welcomed the challenge and the exhaustion that came with it, keeping the darker thoughts at bay. As he rode into the yard, one of the ranch hands, a young man named Billy who couldn't be more than 19, hailed him from the corral. "Boss, that new stallion's acting up again. Nearly took Thompson's arm off when he tried to saddle him." Heath dismounted, handing his reins to Billy. "Put my horse up, would you? I'll see to the stallion." The horse in question was a magnificent black Arabian that Sinclair had purchased at considerable expense from a breeder in Kentucky. The animal had a reputation for being difficult, which was precisely why Heath had advised buying him. A challenging horse was worth 10 docile ones if you had the patience to earn its trust. As he approached the corral, he could see the stallion pacing nervously, nostrils flared, ears pinned back against his head. Thompson, one of the older hands, was nursing a bloody forearm while cursing fluently. "That devil needs to be shot," he growled as Heath approached. "Nearly tore my arm clean off. He's just scared," Heath said mildly, studying the horse's movements. "Someone mishandled him in the past." "He doesn't trust people." "Well, he trusts you well enough," Thompson grumbled. "Damned if I know how you do it." Heath smiled slightly. "Patience, mostly, and listening to what he's trying to tell me." It was the same approach he was taking with Samantha Lawson, though he doubted she'd appreciate the comparison. But the principle was the same: respect, patience, and a willingness to wait for trust to develop naturally rather than trying to force it. "Go get that arm looked at," he told Thompson. "I'll handle the stallion." As the older man limped away, still muttering curses, Heath leaned against the corral fence, making no move to enter. The stallion watched him warily, still pacing, but with less agitation now that the source of his distress had departed. "That's right," Heath murmured. "No one's going to hurt you. No one's going to force you to do anything you don't want to do." Gradually, the horse's ears came forward, his posture relaxing slightly. Heath took off his hat and hung it on a fence post, then slowly, deliberately climbed into the corral. The stallion snorted and backed away, but didn't bolt or charge as he had with Thompson. For the next hour, Heath simply existed in the same space as the nervous animal, occasionally talking to him in that same calm, steady voice, but making no attempt to approach or touch him. By the time the sun was high overhead, the stallion had stopped pacing and was cautiously sniffing at Heath's outstretched hand. "See, not so terrible after all," Heath said softly as the velvet muzzle made contact with his palm. "Just takes time to build trust." "Impressive," a voice called from beyond the corral. Heath looked up to see Jacob Sinclair watching, his expression one of grudging admiration. Thompson was ready to put a bullet in that horse's head. "That would have been a waste of a fine animal," Heath replied, carefully stepping back from the stallion, who watched him with much less fear now. He just needs time and consistent handling. Time and consistent handling, Sinclair repeated thoughtfully. Seems to be your approach to a lot of things. His gaze was knowing. Including William Lawson's daughter, Heath felt a flush creeping up his neck, but he met his employer's eyes steadily. Miss Lawson is her own woman, sir. I'm just hoping for the chance to know her better. Sinclair snorted. Half the men in the territory have hoped for that, and she's shot down every one of them, sometimes literally. What makes you think you'll fare any better? It was a fair question, and one Heath had asked himself more than once over the past week. I don't know that I will, he admitted. But some things are worth the risk of failure. The older man studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Well, you've certainly got more patience than most, I'll give you that. He gestured toward the main house. Come on up when you're done here. Got some plans to discuss for the spring roundup. As Sinclair walked away, Heath turned back to the stallion, who was watching him with wary curiosity. What do you think? He asked the horse. Am I wasting my time with Miss Lawson? The stallion snorted and tossed his head, which Heath chose to interpret as encouragement. He laughed softly. Yeah, that's what I thought too. Some things you just can't rush. With one last pat to the horse's neck, he retrieved his hat and left the corral, his mind already turning to the next morning and the brief, precious moments he would spend in Samantha Lawson's company. 2 weeks into Heath Larson's morning vigils, Willow Creek was abuzz with speculation. Bets were being placed at the saloon on how long the stubborn Cowboy would persist, and how long the equally stubborn Samantha Lawson would continue to resist his quiet, patient courtship. For her part, Samantha was growing increasingly flustered by the daily encounters. It wasn't that Heath was doing anything wrong, quite the opposite. He was unfailingly polite, never presumptuous, and seemed content with their brief conversations as she opened the store each morning. He continued to bring her small gifts, not expensive trinkets or flowers that would wilt, but thoughtful items. A perfect pine cone he'd found on the trail, a smooth river stone with interesting patterns, once even a book of poetry he'd picked up on a trip to Tucson. What disturbed her was her own reaction to these gestures. Despite her determination to remain indifferent, she found herself looking forward to their morning exchanges, wondering what he might bring, what stories he might share about life at the Circle S. Worse, she found herself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe during the more dangerous aspects of ranch work, whether he thought of her as often as she thought of him. It was alarming, this gradual shift in her feelings. Samantha had spent years building walls around her heart, determined never to follow in the footsteps of her mother, who had abandoned everything: a promising education, her family's support, her own dreams to follow William Lawson west. Sarah Lawson had loved her husband deeply, but the hardships of frontier life had worn her down year by year. By the time she died of pneumonia when Samantha was 12, she had been a shadow of the vibrant, educated woman who had once taught her daughter to read Shakespeare and solve complex mathematics. Never let a man determine your fate, she had told Samantha in her final days, her voice weak but her eyes fierce with conviction. Love is a beautiful thing, my darling, but not when it comes at the cost of your own self. Samantha had taken those words to heart, shaping her life around self-reliance and independence. And now here was Heath Larson, with his patient smile and steady gaze, making her question everything she had believed about herself and her future. On the morning of the 15th day, Samantha made a decision. This had gone on long enough. She would confront Heath directly, make him understand that his persistence was futile, and put an end to the town's gossip and her own unsettling feelings. But when she stepped onto the boardwalk at precisely 7 o'clock, Heath wasn't there. The bench where he usually sat was empty, no whittling knife or newspaper or cup of coffee in sight. Samantha felt a strange hollowness in her chest, followed immediately by irritation at her own disappointment. Good, she muttered to herself as she unlocked the store. Perhaps he's finally given up. But as the morning wore on with no sign of the Cowboy, Samantha found herself growing distracted, her gaze repeatedly drawn to the window that overlooked the street. By noon, her irritation had shifted from Heath to herself. Why should she care if he'd abandoned his ridiculous vigil? Wasn't that exactly what she wanted? When Jacob Sinclair entered the store shortly after the midday meal, Samantha had to forcibly restrain herself from immediately asking about Heath's whereabouts. "Afternoon, Miss Lawson," Sinclair greeted her, removing his hat. "Your father around?" "He's in the back, taking inventory," she replied, trying to sound casual. "I can fetch him for you. No need to disturb him just yet. I'm in no hurry." Sinclair looked around the well-organized store with appreciation. "You run a tight ship here, Miss Lawson. Your father's lucky to have you." "Thank you, Mr. Sinclair." She hesitated, then added as nonchalantly as possible, "I notice your foreman hasn't been in town today. Nothing wrong at the ranch, I hope." Sinclair's bushy eyebrows rose slightly, a knowing smile tugging at his lips. "Concerned about him, are you?" "Merely curious," Samantha said stiffly. "He's become something of a fixture outside our store these past 2 weeks." "Ah, yes, his morning visits," Sinclair chuckled. "Can't say I entirely approve of my foreman spending time courting when there's work to be done, but Heath gets more accomplished in half a day than most men do in a full one, so I can hardly complain." "He's not courting me," Samantha objected, the familiar heat rising in her cheeks. "No." "What would you call it then?" she frowned, unable to come up with a satisfactory alternative. "It doesn't matter what it's called. I've made my position clear." "So I've heard." Sinclair regarded her thoughtfully. "You know, Miss Lawson, I've been married to my Alina for 35 years now. When I first met her, she wanted nothing to do with me. Said she was going to be a schoolteacher, never marry. Despite herself, Samantha was intrigued. What changed her mind? Time, patience, and the realization that loving someone doesn't mean giving up who you are." He leaned against the counter, his expression growing serious. "I've known a lot of men in my time, Miss Lawson. Good ones, bad ones, and everything in between. Heath Larson is one of the good ones. Whatever he's running from, and we all run from something out here, it hasn't soured him on life or on people. That's rare." "You still haven't told me where he is today," Samantha pointed out, deliberately ignoring the rest of what he'd said. "Ah, yes, he rode out to the north pasture at dawn. One of the hands spotted a mountain lion stalking the herd. Heath took a few men to track it, make sure it doesn't develop a taste for our calves." Samantha's stomach clenched with sudden anxiety. Mountain lions were notoriously dangerous, especially when hungry. "When do you expect him back?" "Hard to say. Tracking takes time, especially in rocky country." Sinclair studied her face, his expression softening. "He knows what he's doing, Miss Lawson. Been hunting mountain lions since he was a boy in Texas, from what he tells me." "I'm sure he's perfectly capable," she said quickly, hoping her concern wasn't as transparent as it felt. "It's just unusual not seeing him this morning. Missed him, did you?" There was no mockery in Sinclair's tone, only gentle understanding. Before she could formulate a response, the door to the store burst open, and Billy, the young ranch hand, stumbled in, his face pale beneath his tan. "Mr. Sinclair, there you are, been looking all over town for you." "What is it, boy?" Sinclair straightened, instantly alert. "It's Larson, sir. There was an accident. The lion, it was bigger than we thought, and when we cornered it, he trailed off, swallowing hard." "Is he alive?" Sinclair demanded. Samantha felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear Billy's response. "Yes, sir, but he's hurt bad. Clawed up his side something fierce before he managed to shoot it. Thompson and Jenkins are bringing him in now. Doc Matthews is waiting at his office." "Thank you, Billy. Go tell the doctor I'll cover any expenses." As the young man hurried out, Sinclair turned to Samantha, his expression grave. "I should go. Heath has no family here. Someone should be with him." "I'll come with you," Samantha heard herself say, already reaching for her shawl. Sinclair looked surprised but didn't object. "What about the store? My father can manage for a few hours." She moved toward the back room, calling out, "Pa, I need to step out. There's been an accident at the Circle S. Heath Larson is hurt." William Lawson appeared in the doorway, concern etched on his weathered face. "Of course, my dear. Go, I'll take care of things here." The walk to Dr. Matthews' office took less than 5 minutes, but to Samantha, it felt like hours. Her mind raced with terrible possibilities, imagining Heath's injuries, wondering if he would survive, trying not to examine too closely why the thought of losing him affected her so deeply. They arrived just as Thompson and Jenkins were carrying Heath into the doctor's office on an improvised stretcher. His shirt had been torn away, revealing deep lacerations across his left side and chest. Blood had soaked through the makeshift bandages, and his face was alarmingly pale beneath his tan. But his eyes were open, and when they fell on Samantha, a flicker of surprise crossed his pain-strained features. "Miss Lawson," he managed, his voice hoarse, "didn't expect to see you here." "Be quiet," she said sharply, fighting back tears. "Save your strength." A ghost of his familiar smile touched his lips. "Yes, madam, Dr. Matthews, a competent man in his 50s who had served as an army surgeon before settling in Willow Creek, quickly took charge. Get him into the examination room. Mrs. Matthews, prepare the chloroform. I'll need to clean and stitch these wounds immediately." As they carried Heath into the back room, he reached out, catching Samantha's hand with surprising strength. "Don't worry," he whispered. "Too stubborn to die before. You change your mind." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him, leaving Samantha standing in the small waiting room with Jacob Sinclair, her heart in her throat and Heath's blood on her hand. The next 4 hours were the longest of Samantha's life. She paced the small waiting room, declining Sinclair's offer to escort her back to the store, unable to leave without knowing whether Heath would survive. "Those wounds looked bad," she said for perhaps the 10th time. "Mountain lion's claws often carry infection." "Matthews knows what he's doing," Sinclair assured her, though the worry in his eyes belied his confident tone. "And Heath is strong, strongest man I've ever hired." Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Dr. Matthews emerged from the examination room, looking tired but satisfied. "He'll live," he announced without preamble. "The wounds were deep, but no vital organs were damaged. I've cleaned and stitched them as best I can. The biggest danger now is infection, but I've treated them with carbolic acid, and Mrs. Matthews will make sure they're kept clean. Can we see him?" Samantha asked, surprising herself with the intensity of her relief. The doctor hesitated. "He's sedated at the moment and will likely sleep through the night, but you can look in on him briefly." Heath lay on a narrow bed, his torso swathed in clean white bandages. His face was still pale, but his breathing was steady and deep. Samantha stood in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? This man was nothing to her, not a relative, not a friend, certainly not a suitor she had encouraged. And yet, seeing him lying there, vulnerable and still, awakened feelings she had long suppressed, a tenderness, a concern that went beyond mere compassion for an injured acquaintance. "You should go home, Miss Lawson," Dr. Matthews said gently. "There's nothing more to be done tonight. Mrs. Matthews and I will watch over him." Reluctantly, Samantha nodded. "Will you send word if there's any change?" "Of course." Outside, the sun was setting, painting Willow Creek in shades of gold and crimson. Jacob Sinclair walked with her back to the store, their conversation minimal, both lost in their own thoughts. At the store entrance, Sinclair paused. "He'll be asking for you when he wakes, you know." Samantha sighed, too emotionally drained to dissemble. "I know. Will you go to him?" It was a simple question, but the answer felt momentous, a turning point she wasn't sure she was ready to face. "I don't know," she admitted. "I need time to think." Sinclair nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fair enough. But don't take too long, Miss Lawson. Life out here is uncertain at best." Today proved that. After he left, Samantha found her father waiting anxiously inside. "How is he?" William asked, guiding her to a chair. "He'll live," she said, sinking down gratefully. "But it was close. The mountain lion, it could have killed him." William studied his daughter's face, noting the lingering fear in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly. "You care for him," he observed quietly. It wasn't a question, but Samantha answered anyway. "I don't know what I feel, Pa. He's only been here a few weeks. I barely know him." "Sometimes a few weeks is all it takes." William sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "When I met your mother, I knew within days that she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. It frightened me, feeling so strongly so quickly." "It frightened Mother too," Samantha recalled. "She told me once that she almost returned east instead of marrying you. She was afraid of losing herself. She was right to be cautious. Marriage changed her life completely more than either of us anticipated." A shadow crossed his face. I've often wondered if she regretted her choice. She didn't, Samantha said with certainty. She told me that too. She missed certain things about her old life, but she never regretted choosing you. William's eyes grew bright. She said that many times. Samantha reached across to squeeze her father's hand. She loved you, Pa, deeply. She wanted me to have choices she didn't have, to be able to determine my own path. And what path are you choosing now, my dear? It was the question Samantha had been avoiding since the moment she'd seen Heath carried into the doctor's office, bloody and barely conscious. What did she want? What was she willing to risk? I don't know, she whispered. I'm afraid, Pa, of what? Of making a mistake, of losing myself, of… She hesitated, then admitted the truth she had been hiding even from herself. Of losing him. The world is so dangerous, and he's right in the middle of it all, facing wild animals and outlaws and who knows what else. Ah, William nodded slowly. That's the rub, isn't it? Loving someone means accepting that you might lose them. It's a terrible risk. How did you bear it? After Mother died, her father's eyes grew distant. With difficulty. There were days I wished I'd never met her, never loved her, just to be spared the pain of losing her. He focused on Samantha again, his gaze steady. But then, I would look at you, at the wonderful, strong woman you were becoming, and I knew that every moment of pain was worth it for the years of joy we shared. Samantha sat in silence, absorbing her father's words. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking the passage of time as she wrestled with her fears and desires. Finally, she stood. I should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day, William nodded, understanding in his eyes. Yes, it will. Whatever you decide, my dear, know that I support you. Your mother would too. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Samantha stared at the ceiling, her thoughts in turmoil. Outside her window, the vast Arizona sky was ablaze with stars, a reminder of how small and fleeting human concerns were in the grand scheme of things. Yet it was those very human concerns, love, fear, hope, connection, that gave life its meaning. Her mother had understood that, even as she cautioned Samantha against sacrificing her independence for a man's approval. But what if there was another way? What if love didn't have to mean submission or loss of self? What if it could be a partnership of equals, each supporting the other while remaining true to their own nature? As dawn broke over Willow Creek, Samantha made her decision. Heath awoke to pain and the disorienting effects of laudanum. For several moments, he couldn't remember where he was or what had happened. Then the memories flooded back: the mountain lion, its savage attack, the desperate ride back to town, and most vividly, Samantha Lawson's face, pale with concern as he was carried into the doctor's office. Had he dreamed that? It seemed unlikely that the woman who had so firmly rebuffed his attentions would suddenly appear at his sick, worry etched on her beautiful face. Ah, you're awake. Dr. Matthews appeared at his bedside, professional satisfaction in his voice. How's the pain? Manageable, Heath rasped, his throat dry. Water. The doctor helped him take a few sips from a glass, then checked his bandages with careful hands. No signs of infection so far, which is fortunate. Mountain lion claws can be deadly even after the initial attack. How long have I been here? Just overnight. It's about 7 in the morning now. 7 o'clock. The time he would normally be sitting outside the Lawson store waiting for Samantha to appear. The thought brought a pang that had nothing to do with his physical injuries. Mr. Sinclair asked to be notified when you woke, Matthews continued. And Miss Lawson left instructions to send word as well. Heath's heart quickened. She did. The doctor's expression was knowing. Indeed, she was quite concerned yesterday, stayed for hours waiting for news. Before Heath could process this information, there was a soft knock at the door and Mrs. Matthews appeared. Doctor, Miss Lawson is here to see the patient. Heath tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Lie still, Matthews admonished. You'll tear open those wounds if you're not careful. To his wife, he said, show her in, my dear, but only for a few minutes. Mr. Larson needs rest. Samantha entered the room hesitantly, a small basket over her arm. She looked tired, as if she hadn't slept well, but to Heath, she had never been more beautiful. Her chestnut hair was neatly braided, and she wore a simple blue dress that brought out the color of her eyes. Miss Lawson, he greeted her, wishing he were anywhere but flat on his back, weak as a newborn calf, Mr. Larson. She came to stand beside his bed, her expression a mixture of relief and something he couldn't quite identify. "You look better than yesterday." "Hard to look worse, I imagine," he said with a weak attempt at humor. A small smile touched her lips. "True, you were a frightful sight." She set the basket on the bedside table. "I brought you some things. Broth from Mrs. Peterson, she swears it has healing properties, and a few books. Dr. Matthews said you'll be confined to bed for at least a week." "That's very kind of you." Heath studied her face, trying to understand the change in her demeanor. Gone was the defensive wariness she usually displayed around him, replaced by a gentler, more open expression. But unexpected. Samantha met his gaze directly. "Yes, well, yesterday was unexpected too." She hesitated, then added softly, "I was afraid you might die." The simple admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Heath felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by caution. "I'm tougher than I look," he assured her. "Takes more than an overgrown cat to do me in. So I see." She reached out, then pulled back as if uncertain whether to touch him. "Why did you do it? Face the mountain lion, I mean. Surely one of the other men could have gone." "It's my job," Heath said simply. "As foreman, I don't ask the hands to take risks I wouldn't take myself. A noble sentiment, but not very practical if it gets you killed." He smiled slightly. "Worried about me, Miss Lawson?" "Yes," she admitted, surprising him with her frankness. "More than I expected to be." Heath's heart beat faster, but he kept his expression neutral. "Does that mean you're reconsidering your position on never marrying?" A startled laugh escaped her. "You're lying there half dead, and that's what you ask." "Seems as good a time as any," he replied, his tone light despite the seriousness behind the question. "A brush with death tends to clarify one's priorities." Samantha shook her head, but there was no anger in her expression. "You are the most persistent man I've ever met, Heath Larson." "I prefer to think of it as determined," he corrected. "When something matters, you don't give up at the first obstacle, or the second, or the 10th. And I matter," she asked softly, "more than I can say." Their gazes held for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Samantha broke the silence. "I need to get back to the store. My father is managing alone." She rose, smoothing her skirt. "I'll check on you tomorrow if that's all right." "I'd like that." Heath caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Thank you for coming, Samantha." It was the first time he had used her given name, and he saw the effect it had on her, a slight widening of her eyes, a flush of color in her cheeks. "You're welcome, Heath," she replied, his name sounding unfamiliar but right on her lips. After she left, Heath settled back against the pillows, exhausted but more hopeful than he had been since arriving in Willow Creek. Something had changed between them, something significant. He could feel it as surely as he could feel the pain of his wounds. Whether it would be enough to overcome Samantha's deep-seated fears about marriage remained to be seen. But for the first time, Heath believed it might be possible, and that was worth any number of mountain lion attacks. True to her word, Samantha returned the next day and the day after that. Each visit lasted a little longer than the one before, their conversations growing deeper and more personal as the barriers between them gradually lowered. Heath told her about his family in Texas, his father, a hard-working rancher who had taught him everything he knew about horses and cattle. His mother, a former schoolteacher who had insisted her children receive an education despite the challenges of frontier life. His sister Emma, whose wit and determination had matched Samantha's own, and his younger brother James, who had dreamed of becoming a doctor before the epidemic took him at just 16. "I miss them every day," Heath admitted on the fourth afternoon of her visits, as sunlight streamed through the small window of his room at the doctor's house. "But the pain isn't as sharp as it was. Time helps, I suppose. Is that why you came to Arizona?" Samantha asked, sitting in the chair beside his bed, a half-forgotten book in her lap. "To escape the memories, partly," he acknowledged. "The ranch held too many ghosts. But also because I needed something new, a fresh start in a place where no one knew me as that poor Larson boy who lost his whole family." Samantha nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I felt something similar after my mother died. Everyone in town looked at me with such pity. It was suffocating." "Exactly," Heath shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing wounds. I didn't want pity, I wanted purpose. And have you found it, purpose? He met her gaze steadily. I'm beginning to. The implication was clear, and for once, Samantha didn't deflect or change the subject. Instead, she reached out and lightly touched his hand where it rested on the blanket. I'm glad. In turn, Samantha shared stories of her own life, her childhood in Willow Creek, her mother's determination that she receive an education despite the limited opportunities in the territory, her growing role in her father's business. Mother always said knowledge was the one thing no one could take from you, she told Heath. She made sure I learned everything she knew: literature, mathematics, even a bit of Latin and French. The other children thought it was strange, a girl studying such things. It's not strange at all, Heath replied. My mother was the same with Emma, said there was no reason a woman's mind should lie fallow just because she was born female. Samantha smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that transformed her face. I wish I could have met your mother. And your sister, they sound like remarkable women. They were, Heath agreed softly. They would have liked you, I think, especially Emma. She never had much patience for convention either. On the 5th day, as Samantha was preparing to leave after a longer visit than usual, Heath caught her hand. I've been thinking, he said, about what you said at the social about not wanting to marry. Samantha tensed slightly but didn't pull away. What about it? I understand why, he said simply. After hearing about your mother, about the choices she made and the regrets she had, I understand why the idea of marriage frightens you. I'm not frightened, she protested automatically. Heath smiled. Aren't you? It's all right if you are. Marriage is a big step, especially out here where a woman's options are so limited once she takes a husband. Samantha studied him, surprise evident in her expression. Most men would try to convince me I'm wrong. I'm not most men. Heath's voice was quiet but firm. And I don't think you're wrong to be cautious. Marriage should be a partnership, not a prison. That's not what I expected you to say. What did you expect? She shrugged, a small, uncertain gesture. The usual arguments that a woman needs a husband's protection, that it's God's plan. That I'll die alone and miserable if I don't marry. Heath laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. Well, I won't deny that protection is sometimes needed out here for men and women both, but as for God's plan and dying alone, those seem like poor reasons to enter into a lifelong commitment. Then what would be a good reason, in your opinion? Samantha asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Heath considered the question seriously. Love, certainly, but also respect, friendship, a shared vision of what life could be. The desire to face whatever comes good or bad with someone by your side who values you for exactly who you are. His words hung in the air between them, earnest and unembellished. Samantha felt something shift inside her, a loosening of the tight knot of fear that had resided in her chest for so long. That's a lovely way to think of it, she said softly. It's the only way that makes sense to me. Heath squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking you for anything, Samantha. Not yet. I just wanted you to know that I understand your hesitation, and I respect it. The simple statement, delivered without pressure or expectation, moved Samantha more than any passionate declaration could have. As she left the doctor's house and walked back to the store, she found herself considering possibilities that she had long ago dismissed as unattainable: a marriage that didn't require the sacrifice of her identity, a partnership with a man who saw her strength as an asset rather than a flaw to be corrected. It was a dangerous line of thinking, she knew. Hope was often the precursor to heartbreak, but for the first time in years, Samantha allowed herself to hope anyway. By the end of the 2nd week, Heath was well enough to return to light duties at the Circle S, though Dr. Matthews strictly forbade any strenuous activity that might reopen his wounds. The daily visits to the doctor's house came to an end, and with them, the private conversations that had drawn Samantha and Heath closer together. For 3 days, Samantha didn't see Heath at all, and she was surprised by how much she missed his company. The store seemed quieter the days longer. She found herself glancing out the window more often, hoping to catch a glimpse of him riding into town. On the 4th day, just as she was opening the store, a familiar figure appeared on the boardwalk. Heath, sitting on the bench where he had spent so many mornings before the mountain lion attack. He looked thinner, his face still bearing the marks of his ordeal, but his smile was as warm as ever. "Good morning, Miss Lawson," he greeted her, tipping his hat as if no time had passed since their last morning encounter. Samantha felt a rush of emotion so strong it momentarily robbed her of speech. Joy, relief, and a sudden, overwhelming tenderness converged, catching her off guard. "Mr. Larson," she managed at last. "You're back." "I promised I'd wait right here," he reminded her, his eyes twinkling. "A mountain lion isn't enough to make me break my word." Without thinking, Samantha crossed the short distance between them and placed her hand on his shoulder, needing the reassurance of physical contact. "You shouldn't be riding yet. Dr. Matthews said at least another week of rest." "Dr. Matthews is a cautious man," Heath replied, covering her hand with his own. "Besides, I had business in town." "What business?" "This." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, beautifully carved with intricate patterns. "I made this for you while I was recovering." "Needed something to keep my hands busy." Samantha took the box, admiring the craftsmanship. It was small enough to fit in her palm, with a hinged lid that opened smoothly when she touched it. Inside was a delicate silver ring set with a small turquoise stone. "Heath," she began, uncertain. "It's not what you think," he said quickly. "Or rather, it is, but not yet. It's a promise, not a proposal." "A promise of what?" His expression grew serious. "A promise that I'll wait as long as it takes for you to be sure, whether that's a month, a year, or 10 years. The ring is yours regardless, a reminder that some things are worth waiting for." Samantha stared at the ring, emotions warring within her. Fear, yes, the old, familiar fear of losing herself, of making a mistake that couldn't be undone. But also a new feeling, one that felt suspiciously like hope. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Heath assured her. "Just know that the offer stands, and in the meantime, I'd like to court you properly if you'll allow it. Dinners, rides in the countryside, maybe even a dance or two at the next social." "People will talk," Samantha said, though without her usual vehemence. Heath smiled. "People already talk. They've been talking since the moment I walked into that church hall and said I'd wait for you. The question is, does their talk matter to you, did it?" Samantha had spent years cultivating an image of fierce independence, partly out of genuine belief, and partly as armor against the very vulnerability she now felt in Heath's presence. The thought of the town watching their courtship, speculating on whether the stubborn Samantha Lawson would finally surrender to romance, was unsettling. But not as unsettling as the thought of losing the connection they had begun to forge during those quiet afternoons in the doctor's house. "No," she said finally, "their talk doesn't matter, but whatever this is between us, it has to be on my terms. I won't be rushed or pressured." "Your terms," Heath agreed without hesitation. "Always." Samantha closed the wooden box, but instead of returning it to Heath, she slipped it into her pocket. "Then yes, Mr. Larson, you may court me, starting with dinner at my father's house this Sunday if you're available." The smile that lit Heath's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "I'm available," he assured her. "I'll bring a bottle of that Kentucky bourbon Mr. Sinclair's been bragging about. I think your father will appreciate it." "He will," Samantha agreed, finding herself smiling in return. "And Heath, yes, I'm glad you didn't give up. When everyone laughed at me that night when I said I'd never marry. I'm glad you saw something worth waiting for." Heath stood, careful of his healing wounds, and took her hand in his. With deliberate slowness, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he raised it to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Some things," he said softly, "are worth any wait." The courtship of Samantha Lawson and Heath Larson became the talk of Willow Creek, though not in the way most had expected. There was no whirlwind romance, no rushed engagement, despite the obvious affection between them. Instead, over the course of the next year, they built something deeper and more enduring, a partnership based on mutual respect and genuine friendship. Heath kept his promise to court her on her terms. Sunday dinners at the Lawson home became a regular tradition. Heath would arrive promptly at 5, a small gift in hand, usually something practical that showed his understanding of Samantha's nature, like a beautifully crafted ledger for the store accounts or a rare book he'd found on one of his trips to Tucson. William Lawson, initially cautious, soon warmed to the young man who treated his daughter with such obvious respect. The two men discovered a shared interest in chess, and their after-dinner games became another tradition, with Samantha watching in amusement as they engaged in good-natured competition. As Heath's wounds healed and he returned to full duties at the Circle S, he and Samantha began taking rides together on Sunday afternoons, exploring the countryside around Willow Creek. Heath was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging as he helped Samantha improve her riding skills. In turn, she introduced him to her favorite spots, a hidden waterfall in the foothills, a grove of ancient cottonwoods where she'd played as a child, a high ridge that offered breathtaking views of the territory stretching away to the horizon. It was on that ridge, 6 months into their courtship, that Heath first kissed her. They had ridden out early to watch the sunrise, a picnic breakfast packed in their saddlebags. As the first golden rays broke over the distant mountains, painting the landscape in warm light, Heath had turned to her, his expression serious. "Samantha," he said quietly, "I've been thinking." She smiled, teasing. "A dangerous pastime, I'm told, indeed." He returned her smile briefly, then grew serious again. "We've been courting for half a year now, longest courtship in Willow Creek history, according to Mrs. Whittaker." "Mrs. Whittaker should mind her own business," Samantha replied, though without heat. The town gossip's opinions had ceased to bother her months ago. "Probably," Heath agreed. "But in this case, she's not entirely wrong. 6 months is a long time for a man to court a woman without certain expressions of affection." Samantha felt her cheeks warm but met his gaze steadily. "You said you'd wait, that we'd proceed on my terms." "And I meant it," he assured her quickly. "I still do, but I was wondering if, perhaps, your terms might now include a kiss. Just one," he added hastily. "If you're not ready, I understand completely." The earnestness in his expression, the careful way he phrased his request, as if her comfort and consent were the most important considerations in the world, touched Samantha deeply. In that moment, she realized that the fear that had held her back for so long had gradually, almost imperceptibly, been replaced by trust. "I think," she said slowly, "that my terms could indeed include a kiss. Perhaps even two if the first one is satisfactory." Heath's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I'll do my best to ensure satisfaction, madam." He leaned forward, one hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite gentleness. His lips, when they met hers, were warm and surprisingly soft. The kiss was brief, tender, a question rather than a demand. When he pulled back slightly, his eyes searching her face for a reaction, Samantha found herself leaning forward to recapture his lips with her own. The second kiss was deeper, more certain. Heath's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Samantha felt a warmth spreading through her body that had nothing to do with the rising sun. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, she rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Was that satisfactory?" Heath asked, a hint of laughter in his voice. "Moderately," she replied, looking up with a mischievous smile. "Though I think further practice might be required for a definitive assessment." Heath laughed, the sound echoing across the ridge. "I'm at your service, Miss Lawson. Always." From that day forward, their courtship deepened, physical affection now a natural extension of the emotional connection they had built. But still, Samantha held back from accepting the ring that lay waiting in the wooden box Heath had given her. Something, a last vestige of fear, a lingering doubt, kept her from taking that final step. It wasn't until the 1-year anniversary of their first meeting that everything changed. The spring roundup at the Circle S was in full swing, with Heath working from dawn until dusk, coordinating the ranch hands as they gathered cattle from the far-flung corners of the property. Samantha hadn't seen him for nearly a week, the longest they had been apart since he began courting her. She was in the store, helping her father with the monthly accounts, when Sheriff Thomas burst through the door, his face grave. "William, Samantha," he greeted them tersely. "There's trouble at the Circle S. A gang of rustlers hit the north pasture this morning. There was a fight." Samantha felt her blood turn to ice. Heath, the sheriff, hesitated, He's alive but shot. They're bringing him to town now. It was happening again, the fear, the terrible waiting, the image of Heath bleeding and in pain. But this time, as Samantha paced outside Dr. Matthews' office while the physician tended to Heath's wounds, she found her thoughts unexpectedly clear. Yes, life in the territory was dangerous. Yes, loving someone meant accepting the possibility of loss. But the alternative, never loving, never connecting, living behind walls of her own, making suddenly seemed far more terrifying than any risk she might take by opening her heart fully to Heath Larson. When Dr. Matthews finally emerged, his expression was reassuring. "Just a flesh wound to the shoulder," he reported. "Painful but not serious. He's asking for you, Miss Lawson." Heath was sitting up in bed when she entered, his left shoulder bandaged but his color good. When he saw her, relief washed over his features. "Samantha, I'm sorry about this. Not exactly how I planned to spend the day." "Stop apologizing for being shot," she said, coming to sit beside him on the bed. "It's becoming a habit with you, getting injured and scaring me half to death." He had the grace to look sheepish. "Not intentional, I assure you. The rustlers came out of nowhere. We weren't expecting trouble." "You never are," she said softly. "That's the nature of trouble, isn't it? It doesn't announce itself in advance." Heath studied her face, noting the lack of anger or accusation in her expression. "You're taking this calmly." "Am I?" Samantha laughed, a sound caught between humor and resignation. "I don't feel calm, I feel." She paused, searching for the right words. "I feel like I've been fighting a losing battle for a very long time and I'm finally ready to surrender." "Surrender to what? To this, to us?" She reached into her pocket and withdrew the wooden box he had given her a year ago, opening it to reveal the silver and turquoise ring nestled inside. "To the future, whatever it holds." Heath's eyes widened. "Samantha, are you saying?" "I'm saying yes," she confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "Yes to the ring. Yes to marriage. Yes to building a life together on our terms." For a moment, Heath seemed speechless, joy and disbelief warring on his face. Then he reached out with his good arm, pulling her close. "Are you sure? After all this time, what changed?" Samantha touched his bandaged shoulder gently. "This, or rather, my reaction to it. I realized that I've been so afraid of losing myself in marriage, so determined to maintain my independence, that I've been denying the truth." "What truth?" "That I love you," she said simply. "That I have for months now. And that loving you doesn't diminish me, it makes me stronger, braver, more myself than I've ever been." Heath's smile was radiant despite the pain he must have been feeling. "I love you too, Samantha Lawson, more than I have words to express." He took the ring from the box and slid it onto her finger where it fit perfectly. "I've been carrying this with me every day, hoping, waiting." "You've done enough waiting," Samantha said, leaning forward to kiss him softly. "It's time we started living." They were married in the church at Willow Creek 2 months later, once Heath's shoulder had fully healed. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the entire town, many of whom had bet significant sums on whether the stubborn Miss Lawson would ever relent and marry her patient suitor. Samantha wore a gown of ivory satin, ordered from San Francisco at her father's insistence. "Your mother would want you to have something beautiful," William had said, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Something worthy of the occasion." Heath, standing at the altar in a new black suit, looked at his bride with such undisguised adoration that even Mrs. Whittaker was moved to dab at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Never thought I'd see the day," she whispered loudly to her husband. "That Lawson girl swore she'd never marry, and look at her now." "They make a fine couple," Mayor Whittaker replied, surprising his gossip-prone wife with his sentiment. "Young Larson has the patience of a saint and the determination of a mule, exactly what a woman like Samantha needs." After the ceremony, the entire town gathered for the celebration at the Circle S Ranch, hosted by Jacob Sinclair and his wife. Tables groaned under the weight of food, a band played lively tunes, and the dancing continued well into the night. As the evening drew to a close, Heath led Samantha away from the festivities to a quiet spot beneath the stars. "Happy, Mrs. Larson?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Very," she assured him, leaning into his embrace, "though I'm still getting used to the name." We could have kept yours if you preferred, he reminded her. I meant what I said about this marriage being on your terms. Samantha smiled, turning in his arms to face him. Our terms, she corrected gently. That's what partnership means, isn't it? Finding the middle ground where both people can thrive. Heath kissed her, a lingering, tender caress that held all the promise of their future together. So wise, my wife, I'm a fortunate man. And I'm a fortunate woman, she replied. To have found a man who was willing to wait until I was ready, who saw my strength as an asset rather than a flaw. I fell in love with that strength, Heath said simply. With your determination, your intelligence, your refusal to conform to others' expectations. Why would I want to change any of that? In his eyes, Samantha saw what she had been searching for without realizing it: acceptance, respect, and a love that enhanced rather than diminished her sense of self. It was everything her mother had wanted for her, everything she had thought impossible in the harsh realities of frontier life. Take me home, she whispered against his lips. Our home. Their home was a small but comfortable house on the edge of town, close enough to the Lawson store for Samantha to continue working with her father, yet near enough to the Circle S for Heath to fulfill his duties as foreman. It was a compromise that honored both their needs, a physical manifestation of the balance they were determined to maintain in their marriage. Later that night, as they lay entwined in the darkness of their new bedroom, Samantha traced the scars on Heath's chest, reminders of the mountain lion that had, in its way, brought them closer together. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. Deciding to wait for me that night at the social. It was a long wait, with no guarantee I'd ever change my mind. Heath captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. Not for a moment. Some things are worth waiting for, Samantha. You taught me that. And you taught me that love doesn't have to mean losing oneself, she replied. That it can mean finding parts of yourself you never knew were missing. Outside their window, the vast Arizona sky was ablaze with stars, silent witnesses to the beginning of a journey neither of them could have anticipated a year before. Whatever challenges lay ahead, and in the untamed territory, there would be many, they would face them together. Two independent spirits who had found in each other not limitation, but liberation. Epilogue: 5 years later, the Lawson General Store, now officially renamed Lawson and Larson Mercantile, was busier than ever on a bright spring morning in 1890. Samantha moved efficiently behind the counter, wrapping purchases and making change, while Heath loaded supplies into a customer's wagon outside. In the 5 years since their marriage, much had changed in Willow Creek. The railroad had finally reached the town, bringing new settlers, new businesses, and a sense of progress that had transformed the once sleepy community. William Lawson had partially retired, though he still came to the store most days, primarily to entertain his grandson with stories of the early days of the territory. Grandpa, tell me again about the mountain lion. 4-year-old James Larson demanded, his green eyes so like his father's wide with excitement. William chuckled, settling the boy on his knee. Well, your pa was the bravest man in the territory, facing down that big cat to protect the ranch's cattle. Got himself all clawed up, he did, but he never complained, not once. That's not quite how I remember it, Heath commented as he re-entered the store, dust from the street clinging to his boots. There was a fair amount of complaining, as I recall, Papa. James scrambled down from his grandfather's lap and ran to Heath, who swept him up in a smooth motion born of practice. Grandpa says you were brave. Your grandpa is getting forgetful in his old age, Heath said with a wink at William. It was your mother who was brave. She's the one who shot the Harris brothers' hats clean off their heads when they got too fresh. Heath, Samantha protested, though she couldn't help smiling at the memory. Don't tell him that. He'll think shooting at people is acceptable behavior. Only in very specific circumstances, son, Heath clarified solemnly. And only if you're as good a shot as your mother. James nodded, clearly filing this information away for future reference. Can I go see the new horses at the livery, mister? Thompson said he'd let me sit on the pony if you said it was all right. Heath glanced at Samantha, who nodded her permission. Go on then, but straight to the livery and back, you hear? No detours to the candy store. Yes, Mama. James was already halfway to the door, eager anticipation evident in every line of his small body. As he disappeared onto the street, Heath moved behind the counter to stand beside his wife, slipping an arm around her waist. "He's getting more like you every day." "Same stubborn chin, same determination. Poor child," Samantha replied dryly. "Let's hope he has your patience to balance it out." William rose from his chair, a knowing smile on his face. "I'll just step out for some air, give you two a moment alone." Once he had gone, Heath turned Samantha to face him, his expression suddenly serious. "Are you happy, Samantha, truly?" It was a question he asked periodically, as if to reassure himself that their unconventional arrangement, her continuing to work at the store while he managed both his duties at the Circle S and their growing business interests in town, was still satisfying to her. "Truly," she confirmed, rising on her toes to press a quick kiss to his lips. "Are you happier than I ever thought possible?" His hand drifted to rest on her abdomen, where the slightest swell was just becoming noticeable beneath her dress. "Though I'll be even happier when this little one arrives safely." Their second child was due in the fall, a prospect that filled them both with joy and a touch of apprehension after Samantha's difficult first pregnancy. But Dr. Matthews had assured them that everything appeared normal this time, and Samantha felt stronger and healthier than she had with James. "She'll be fine," Samantha said confidently. "Strong like her mother, Heath raised an eyebrow. "You sound very certain." Samantha smiled mysteriously. "Just a feeling. I think James needs a sister, someone to keep him in line when we're not looking." "Like Emma did for me," Heath said softly, his expression momentarily distant as he thought of his long-lost sister. "Exactly." Samantha covered his hand with her own where it rested on her belly. "I was thinking we might name her Emma, Sarah, if it is a girl, after both the strong women who shaped us." Heath's eyes grew bright with emotion. "I'd like that very much." The bell over the door jingled as a customer entered, bringing them back to the present moment. As Samantha turned to greet the newcomer, Heath marveled yet again at the journey that had brought them here from that night at the social when he'd impulsively declared he would wait for her. To this life they had built together, blending her independence and his patience into something stronger than either could have created alone. They had faced challenges, certainly Heath's injuries, Samantha's difficult first pregnancy, the skepticism of those who doubted a woman could be both a wife and a businesswoman. But each obstacle had only strengthened their bond, reinforcing the foundation of mutual respect and deep love upon which their marriage was built. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of their home watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, James asleep in his bed inside, Samantha leaned against Heath's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Do you ever think about that night at the social?" she asked. "When everyone laughed at me for saying I'd never marry," Heath smiled, drawing her closer against the evening chill. "Sometimes. Mostly I think about how beautiful you looked when you were angry, all fire and determination." "And you just calmly announced you'd wait right there," she recalled, a hint of wonder still in her voice after all these years. "As if you knew something I didn't." "I knew nothing," Heath admitted, "except that you were worth waiting for no matter how long it took." 5 years ago today," Samantha mused. "That's when you gave me the ring in Dr. Matthews' office after the rustlers shot you. Best decision I ever made, getting shot that day," Heath teased. "Finally convinced you to make an honest man of me." Samantha laughed, the sound carrying across their small garden where spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. "I sometimes wonder what my mother would think of all this of us, of the life we've built." "I think she'd be proud," Heath said seriously. "You've honored her memory by living exactly as she hoped you would on your own terms, without compromise." "Not without compromise," Samantha corrected gently, "but with the right kind of compromise, the kind that makes both people stronger, not weaker." As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared, they sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts, yet profoundly connected. In the distance, the sounds of Willow Creek settling for the night drifted to them, piano music from the saloon, the occasional shout of laughter, the whistle of the evening train pulling into the station. It was not the life either of them had envisioned for themselves before that fateful night at the social. It was, somehow, infinitely better a life built on patience, respect, and the kind of love that transcends convention. When they finally rose to go inside, Heath paused in the doorway, drawing Samantha into his arms for a lingering kiss. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "For what? For being worth the wait." Samantha smiled, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had seen in her not someone to be tamed or changed, but someone to be cherished exactly as she was. "And thank you," she replied softly, "for waiting right there until I was ready." Hand in hand, they entered their home, closing the door on the wild, unpredictable world outside, secure in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together, as equal partners in the greatest adventure of all, the end.